Login accepted.
So, where are we going to start today? We're going to talk about some Ansible. Let me just, yeah. So if you haven't signed in already, please scan the QR code or go on the link tree. So we're here today. This graphic's kind of old actually, but yeah, today's Ansible, and then on Friday there's a workshop, and then actually next week there's no meeting. There might be something else, but there's no meeting. And then next Friday will be a building PC collab with Bronco Esports. And then after that, on the April 29th, will be our last meeting. All right, so just a few announcements before I start with Ansible. If you're interested in attending AI Fair, make sure you come by on April 17th, which is this Thursday. It's held by the school, and there's a schedule right there. And if you're interested, you can register for as a student to attendee. But if you want to volunteer, there's a form on the left. Um, I think volunteers are only for CPP students. So if you're interested in helping out with setting up and all that stuff, make sure you, I guess, make sure you scan that QR code. But other than that, I will move on. All right, so that's what I'm gonna cover for today. So first, I'm gonna talk about what is Ansible, and then kind of give a quick review of SSH and also setting up Ansible, and then how to actually use Ansible and running it, and then I'll go over some scenarios and examples of Ansible. All right, so first, what is Ansible? Ansible is it's just it's a nice tool to have. It's a automation tool that is used for management and configuring servers or devices. So it's it can be used on Linux or Windows. It can do whatever a command line does, but in a more centralized setting. So as you can see on the picture, um, just kind of like your components of Ansible. So you have your control node, which is like a control device or machine that does all the configuration and all the automation. And then your manage nodes, which are like the actual like servers that are being configured. So we'll go more on like how you can set that up and what's actually being run. But the gist of it is that you have one machine that sends out commands to your other like manage machines, and then those commands will do certain things like adding users or changing a configuration for a machine. So before I go on to like talking about what or on like how to use Ansible and more about the command line and stuff like that, you might be wondering like why would we use Ansible? So I listed like 5 benefits here. First one is easy deployment of system templates. So what that means is that you can have you can have a template of like a web server, or like you can organize how you want certain VMs to be deployed. So if I had a list of things that I need for a web server, I can create I can use Ansible to organize that out and making sure that everything is consistent for every machine that you deploy. And then Also scaling out deployments, as you'll see later, that it's really easy to just add another machine to manage and kind of put it under your Ansible umbrella. You can just add the IP and all that stuff, and then you have a long list of VMs, and then it's really easy to just manage those from that control node that I was talking about earlier. And then setup is really straightforward, as you'll see later, that it just requires some basic Linux knowledge, and then just setting up remote access, and after that, it's just writing wherever you want. So setup is straightforward. You can easily go into start writing wherever you need. And then there's a lot of support for cloud platforms, um, like AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud. You can, there's documentation and support modules that are written in Ansible, are written in the documentation that allows you to implement it with the cloud platforms that I mentioned above. And also the cloud platforms itself also have Ansible features they can use on their platform. And then, as I said earlier, there's a extensive documentation. I also linked over here. I think I could just go on. Let me see. Yeah, so if you go here, there's like you can see all this stuff. I could just click here and then like no. Yeah, you get the point. All right, so first, let's do a quick SSH review because as you'll see later, that Ansible really relies on SSH. And then just how to set up Ansible. So SSH or Secure Shell is a network protocol that is used to access remote devices. And, and yeah, and the port that's most commonly used is port 22, and that allows one PC to log into another one without being like physically there. So it's just through like IPs and all that stuff. And then this one's important. There's two ways to authenticate through SSH. You can either do it through password, or you can do it through public key authentication. So what that is like if I give Kenneth a lock, right? I want to yeah, I give him a lock and I have keys to my own lock. So if I want to go to actually this doesn't make sense from a like real life standpoint, but if you use that lock to lock his door, right? And I want to access his house, I have my own key. I can use that key to unlock that lock to enter his house because he gave me permission to go to his house. So that's kind of like what public key is, authentication is kind of like, but the gist of it is if you give your servers a public key, which is that lock that I was talking about, and then you have your own private key, and you use that private key to access those remote servers or Kenneth's house. And then SSH isn't only limited to Linux, it's also available on Windows and Linux, like I said. Right. So to set up Ansible, you kind of need to know some prerequisites or do some prerequisites. Um, if you do have some Linux knowledge beforehand, it might be a little easier to understand. But I made these slides more kind of to guide you through like the steps of setting up Ansible. So first you need one control node and at least one managed node. So what that means is just one VM or one device, whoever it can be, and then at least one other VM or device. And then control node or that controller VM or device has to be a Linux distribution because I don't know, Ansible doesn't want to write stuff for Windows. So you kind of have to use Linux. Sorry, but yeah, then you need to install SSH on every machine that you want to use for Ansible. And I didn't put that there, but you can always search up how to install SSH. Question. All right, so the question was for the control node, is there a GUI? And unfortunately, there's not. Yeah, so this this tool is all command line based. So you'll see later as well that I just on the slides I put up just commands. So yeah, be comfortable with just typing on the terminal. All of misses, you know. Okay, so first you want to install Ansible on that one control node. You just want to run this command, but if you've done Linux before, you know, it's not the same. So I also did link the installation guide for each Linux distribution you decide to use, but it's pretty simple. Just, you know, let me help zoom here. So you just update and then you install Ansible and you're done. And then second part is just creating a user that allows you to remote in. So on all nodes, you want to, I mean, you could customize on how you want to do it, but the way I did it is on all nodes, you create a Ansible user or an account, and then you want to give it sudo privileges. Does anyone know what that means? What sudo privileges?
Bill, does sudo mean super user do?
Yes, one can say that. So, so what that does is just gives you temporary admin privileges to do like admin stuff. Or you can just use root as the user, but I wouldn't recommend it. I mean, you could do it on your own lab, but don't do it in like a business or you might get fired. And then I added those commands. It's just this one adds the user, and then you set passwords for the user. And then here you can add the user to give it access to the sudo privileges. Then here, I'm not gonna go too much into it. Um, it might be in the workshop, but this one creates the public key authentication. Um, yeah, you could, the slides are on Linktree. So yeah. All right, so next up is actually using Ansible. As you'll see later on, that it kind of does whatever a Linux command does, but in a more organized and pretty way. Uh, this is not that pretty. It's just kind of like a wall of text. But this is the actual Ansible command. Um, I'll reference this as we go on to the slides. But all right, so Jumping forward from the Ansible command, it also involves two files. So you have the inventory file, which in that file you list all your managed nodes or all the servers you want to configure. And all of that goes into one file. You have the ability to create groups and kind of organize them out. But as you can see over here on the right, there's like, actually, I'll go more into it later, but next up we have the playbook file. So what that is actually your commands, your whatever you want to do to those servers that you want to manage. So you can execute configurations and yeah, just that's why they call it the playbook, I guess. But um, you see here it has a unit called plays, which is pretty much like your each task you want to execute on the server. But actually, we'll dive more into that. So with the inventory file, you can see here on the very top here is a group name. So what that is how you want to call like these servers. And then if I go back to this one, oh, if I want to go back to the command, this is where you list your group name. So if I called this like web or my host, right? That's how I'll address these IPs here. And then, you can create all the groups you want, put them in put your different servers into different groups, and then you can apply commands to that group. And then I also included inventory files with variables. That's kind of, I'll get more into that later as well, and what these variables mean. But yeah, let's see. Okay. So right now so we just created, let's say we use this inventory file as our example. We can check if, the inventory file lists correctly if we use this command right here, but we can also ping those servers. So this ping doesn't actually do what like ping and pong does, like the ping command. So what's this ping command or ping in Ansible does is actually it remotes into those servers and then it SSH into the servers and then it does some sort of script check. And then if it checks out, you get a pong, like you see right here. So I ran this command. I'll kind of break it down. So it'll be Ansible, which is the Ansible command, and then that group name that I mentioned. So that group name would be wherever you gave, you know, whatever group name you gave to these servers or whatever, right? Or you could use all, which basically grabs all the IP addresses from that inventory file, and then it goes through those IPs. And then I'll skip over here, which is the -I, which is just it lists the inventory file that you want to specify. And then going back here, the -m is your module, and that kind of just specifies like which quote unquote command you want to use or tool you want to use. I'll mention more about modules later. And then after that, you have over here, which is the -u, which is a username, and then -k. So going back here, just going through everything. So as you can see right here, -u, which is SSH username, you need to specify a SSH user in order to, log into those remote servers. You have to give it a username. So like I said earlier, how I set up everything was create a Ansible account on all the servers. So in this case, you would put like this right this can people in the back see this? See my mouse? So right here would be TACU and then Ansible, and then that's the username. Then TAC-K, it will ask for a password. So if you have a standardized like password, like all the passwords are on the same, then you can, type out the password and then it will go through all the IPs. But if you have public key authentication set up, you don't need the TAC-U and the TAC-K because it will just automatically go in. But something to note. Right. So after you check that all your managed nodes and managed servers are actually working, you can actually start making plays or task. So what makes a playbook playbook play? Then- So first you have plays, which I mentioned earlier, is a single unit of configuration execution. So what that kind of looks like is right here, this purple box. It has one play. They're kind of separate. Actually, it's two plays. Wait, no, no, no. So yeah, it's just one box right here. So it has a task, which is a specific action that needs to be applied. So then you can see right here, we notice the yum. Do you know what yum is? We know what yum is, right? So yum is installs packages. So we see that it uses the yum and then it names the package right here and then the version of the package. So that's what we call a module here. It's just any command that it might be like built in to the to the Linux terminal or to the OS. It could be anything, but it's being used to accomplish a task, and then that task, makes up a play. So it's just kind of like a subset of everything. And then right here we have the bottom is another play, installs another service. All right, before I move on to like more of the modules and like what you might want to do with Ansible, is there any questions? All right. Ryan has a question. So Ryan asks, what if I wanted a fast way to deploy a lightweight version of offensive tools custom built on a Debian base in a Docker container? Can I just keep this on a remote server in the isolated Docker container at 10 gigs and then quickly pull the playbook? Let me read that carefully. So mm, there's kind of several ways you can do that. I didn't really look into using Ansible with Docker. This is kind of more of a introduction to Ansible, but I think what you could do is mm, actually you can get like a blank Debian image, And then after you create the container, you can run the playbook to actually install those offensive tools. Um, you could also put those offensive tools on a Debian image and then upload it to GitHub, or not GitHub, to Docker Hub. And then you can pull that image with all your tools from anywhere with Docker, but that you might be constrained to storage size. But yeah, I would have to look at that, Ryan. Yep, of course. All right, so some of the go over some of the stuff you can do with Ansible. So first, this one's kind of interesting. That module is called gather facts. It's it's kind of their buzzword for just like listing properties about a server. So if you use like the gather facts module, it'll list all the information about the managed host or the managed node. And then you don't have to run this module every time because it's being run it's being run every time you execute a playbook. And then I'll talk about later on how you can actually run your playbooks. But you can see right here, there's like, it just spits different information like user directory, user ID, and all that stuff, IP addresses. And then you could use that later on to, as a variable or whatever. But then next up, you have install packages. There's different ways to install packages. You can see right here, there's like the app, yum, DNF, or you could use package. That one's more dynamic. And what that does is just whatever OS is being used, it'll just install that package name using, the default package manager. And then next up, you have copy files, kind of the same thing as the copy command in Linux. You have your source, destination, and then you could change up like who the file belongs to in the group, and like all that stuff. And then service, also same thing. You can, start a service, stop it, reload it, all that stuff. And then you can create users or manage them. So right here, you can see that John Doe is being created. And then you can set a UID, which is like a user ID on it. And then you can give it like admin privileges and all that stuff. But after you write out your playbooks, this is how you can execute them. So it's pretty similar to the command I showed in the beginning right here, except maybe like the only difference is you run the Ansible dash playbook, and then you specify the inventory file, which is that list of hosts, and then you have your tag U and tag K, for logging into a user. It's optional if you have public key authentication, but up to you on how you set it up. And then this last flag right here, I didn't talk about it, but if you notice on some of these, let me see. Okay, never mind, none of them have it. But this last flag right here, ask, become, pass. What that does is actually asking for the password when you sudo. So the machine or how it will work is when you run the playbook, it will ask for a become password, and you can specify which. No, no, if you use become, so there's a keyword called become. And if that says true, that means it will use like the sudo. By default, it uses like sudo. So it'll be like sudo and then whatever command needs to run. And then, every time you use sudo, what does it ask for? Patrick? Yep. Yep. So every time you use sudo, it always asks for a password. So that's what that's doing. So ask become password, you enter a password, you're able to use sudo and then you can authenticate. And then the last argument is just the playbook. So you just specify the playbook name. I don't think I talk about it, but yeah, it's fine. So yeah, playbook name, it could be playbook dot YAML, whatever. All right, so um, I kind of gave some example, or I'm gonna pull up some examples, but I pulled it from Google, so it's not super customizable, but I can run through the examples with you guys. All right, so right here, I'll go line by line. It's kind of like code review. So first right here is name. Um, that kind of just gives it when you execute a playbook, it'll like sort out, it'll output like in like a nice, neat way. So it'll be like task one, and then it'll be install Apache web server, and then it will run all these tasks right here, and then hosts all. That's that's all the hosts that you specify in your inventory file, and then task is kind of how you can separate each task. So it's like right here would be task one and task two. Right here is installing Apache, which is a web server. Yes. And then DNF, that's the module installs Apache. This is Apache and CentOS. And then become yes, you use sudo to install Apache. Let me reshare my whole screen real quick. That's okay. So basically what that command runs is this one. Right, so this whole block right here pretty much installs this. That's what it pretty much does. And then present, I believe it's just whatever's like the current updated one on the system. Correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, this whole thing runs this command. And then there's the when keyword. And what that does is kind of like a if statement. It's like if it's, if it's Red Hat, then run this task. And then down here it does the same thing, but yeah, if same thing. Instead of DNF, I might just use apt. Thank you, Caitlin. But yeah, that one's pretty straightforward. And then this one right here. Oh, this one right here. I'm not gonna go too much into it. I'll just note some of the keywords there. But you have your inventory, or you have your inventory file right here. Oh, your inventory file right here, and then your playbook file right here. But yeah, going line by line real quick. Host all of this, become, use sudo, and then pre-task is kind of specific. It's just it runs these tasks before it gathers like information about the hosts or about the managed hosts. And then is there anything else? There's update only and update cache. And what that does is just your like your apt update or your yum update command and your upgrade. And then other than that, and then you notice right here it specifies a different group. It only specifies the web servers group. So just one right here, except this one all is this one, but web servers is just this one. And then everything looks pretty similar. Yeah. All right. So, this meeting was kind of brief, but um, some of key takeaways from this meeting is, Ansible is really nice if you want to automate some of your um, development environments. So if you ever need to like start up a VM, you could just run Ansible and then it has all your configurations that you need to get started with whatever you're doing with that VM. And it has a lot of support. I think it's been running for, I don't know how long, but for a few years, there's a lot of documentation for it. A lot of people use it and it's well known. And then it's really straightforward to set up. You just need SSH. There's guides on SSH, how to set that up. And then all you need is just two files and then just learning the command line. And then you can just two files and a few commands can run like 100 commands on three machines. Do the math, right? It's pretty nice. And then at first I thought of Ansible as like, oh, it's just a tool that runs commands. But if you think about it, it's pretty convenient to have because even though you can do this with just like running commands, it offers a way to kind of like write it out really neat. And, it's so similar that, you can easily get a hang of it. And yeah, it's just another tool to add to your toolbox. But any questions? Nope, nope. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. So if you want to get some hands-on experience, come on this Friday for the Ansible workshop. Look out for a Swift announcement. I'll send out a form to fill out and get you set up for SDC stuff. But yeah, if there's no questions, I think I'm good for today.